if you think about the way our minds work as humans, there's a great book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman that really outlines this framework that basically our minds have two different modes of processing information. You have your conscious mode of processing information, and then you have your subconscious mode of processing information. And so I think the subconscious mode is what they call system 1 in the book. And so that's going to be like all of your automatic reflexes, all of your breathing, all of like your fight, flight, freeze response, your heart rate, like all of those things are actively controlled by your brain, but you're not aware of any of those things. And so it's in control of all the automatic processes and all of the extremely fast reflexes that you have. And then we have our conscious brain that we actually are thinking. This is where our reasoning is going. This is where we're creating stories about to organize our action and figure out what we're doing. And so like the tightly integrated kind of all-in-one architecture for inference and training, I think is really going to be good at that logical, always learning. Like our brains don't pause and go do a training run for several months and then update all of our neural net weights. And then we go out into the world and do real stuff for a while. And then we have to, go into hibernation and then retrain our neural nets again in order to get smarter. We're constantly learning and acting together in this loop. And all of that happens in our conscious system 2 thinking. And so I think that architectures where you do have this tighter integration between inference and training are really going to excel at that specific, conscious system 2 type mode of thinking. And then for other things where, your reflexes, they're just kind of on autopilot. You don't think about when, you don't have to update the weights on your reflexes very often. So that type of application, I think, is going to be very well suited towards dedicated training architecture and dedicated inference architecture. And like I said, I think all of these are going to win. They're all going to have their own place, and they're all going to be part of what it really takes for us to solve artificial general intelligence.
So everybody wins as long as you can create the compute necessary to actually process this, because it's so early on in the game that any advancements you're going to make are going to be exponential in the coming 5 to 10 years. And so as long as you have some sort of strategy to give yourself the ability to do inference and training, you're going to be in good shape. As long as you do so smartly and cost effectively. And then in the long term, the ones that are able to monetize that computer inference will actually be the winners.
Yeah. And like we said, Tesla is focused on the things that they foresee as being the big bottlenecks in the future for the specific things that they want to do. And then the other thing to also bring into this conversation is that don't forget, Elon is the owner, CEO of X and XAI. And if Grok's mission is to understand the fundamental reality that is the universe to the best degree possible, then exploring the real world is going to be a huge pivotal part of doing that. And so there's going to be a ton of convergence between XAI and Tesla through the Optimus robot project in trying to build, general intelligence for general use case robotics. And XAI has tons and tons of training capacity that they are building and going to build. And so Elon already has tons of resources at his fingertips and at his disposal to do these massive training things through XAI. And so Tesla doesn't necessarily have to hedge their bets anymore on trying to have access to large training compute if, Jensen doesn't deliver because, Jensen already delivered and Elon already owns what Jensen delivered. It just lives over at XAI, and XAI and Tesla just have to do whatever deal is necessary if they do need a whole bunch more training compute. Like the training compute that they're building out at XAI is so far beyond the plans that they had for what they're going to be building with Dojo 1, Dojo 2, Dojo 3, that it really kind of invalidated the need for the Dojo project at all. assuming that Tesla and XAI can come up with a mutually beneficial deal to exchange training compute time for data, um, and have everyone be happy from an investor standpoint and regulatory and all that.
And so, do you think all these little like things that are happening? So, bringing on Samsung as the partner, scaling down and sort of eliminating Dojo as we know it, and then doing an investor vote in November for a stake in XAI. Do you think these are all clues that just back up exactly what you're saying? Like, look at all this movement that's happening, like from not just from a strategic perspective, but like outright saying, "Hey, Tesla should take a stake in XAI." It does feel like that marriage is inevitable at this point.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I read it is that Elon and Tesla are doing what they've always been doing very, very well, and that is de-risking the supply chain, de-risking the future to the maximum degree possible, giving themselves the most optionality and having the best contingency plans in place. And when you look at a future not too long from now, and if you believe like Elon believes that China is likely to disrupt TSMC and Taiwan in a big way inside of the next 5 years, and that 5-year time window is a critical time for Tesla to be pushing forward on AI, not falling backwards. And especially if you think that developing Optimus needs to be a project that's insulated from China, just due to the geopolitical tensions between the United States and China, then you'd really like your entire Optimus supply chain to be as independent of China as possible, both from a raw materials perspective, from a chips perspective. But, also, even though TSMC isn't in China, a risk from China due to invasion. So, like, you want all this stuff to be here in the United States as much as possible. You want to control your own destiny. And then if you can figure out how to do that while also building this general purpose training and inference architecture, and you have access to these huge, clusters with XAI all at the same time, just a lot of things kind of line up together and make sense as one unified, cohesive strategy.
Yeah, and I do think the one conversation we had around like the likelihood that next generation AI embodied machines, like human or robots embodied machines, these are domestic national security, like these are national security type things, and to localize the supply chain for the entire thing, localizing the supply chain for the entire thing is going to be insanely important for all players, because what you don't want is a country that potentially doesn't have your best interests in mind to put arbitrary like barriers on your most important product of all time and asset, and be like, oh, so yeah, we can't give you chips today. Sorry. And so it's unbelievably important. Real quick, I want to read the messages that we got from James Dama talking about this too. It backs up a lot of what Hans said, but I just want to make sure I share that with y'all. And then while I do that, if y'all have any questions in the comments section below, go ahead and post them. We'll pull up only the best ones, which might be all of them. We'll see. So let me go ahead and share my screen and read.
So yeah,
go ahead,
put
Hans.
question in all caps in front of your question, so that makes it easier for us to find, and then we'll try and pull those up.
Okay. So now I have to remember which one's the first one. I think it's this one. All right. Was it the first one? Yes, it is. Okay. So this is a message from, so we asked, basically, I sent a DM to Dalma with Hans and I, and James have a group, which is awesome. And then I was basically like, what the hell's happening? That was my question. What the hell's happening, basically? This was James' response. So I haven't read the MSM articles, which are often just noise, but this development seems pretty predictable to me. Going over to Samsung for the next gen means abandoning the Dojo tile. What the hell is WOCOS? WOCOS? You know what that stands for?
So that is the packaging architecture that I referenced earlier. WOCOS stands for wafer on chip on
Got it.
Substrate. Yeah. So it wouldn't be what I think he misspelled it. I think that's supposed to be CoWoS, which is chip on wafer on substrate. Which is the Dojo.
That's in a nerd moment.
Yes. Well,
Okay.
the people that know will know.
Okay. Perfect. That you know, the audience now knows that you have credibility when you're talking about this, because you're correcting a a thing anyway. And all the complex packaging and interconnect.
James knows. I think that's just an accidental typo.
Yeah. And interconnect that went along with it, which means Dojo 3 is a complete redesign and probably goes in a similar architectural direction to the other in-house silicon hyperscalers. Conventional cluster packaging and interconnect with big rack mounted PCBs packed with compute die, memory, and I/O chips. This is much less of a science project than the beyond next gen approach that Dojo was going for. So it should get you to useful systems faster. Did you want to add any clarity or add anything to that?
So instead of, Dojo really was pushing the frontier on what is possible with, AI training chip architectures. And so that's why it's using, these super fancy packaging technologies from TSMC, where you're doing a combination of a couple of things. You're putting your memory chips and your logic chips and whatever other types of chips that you've got for your networking chips, potentially all on what's called a through silicon via, which is basically directly connecting those chips together without having to go through copper wire traces on the thing. Basically, all of that does is it gets those chips closer together as far as the path that the information has to flow, so that the information flows more quickly, more seamlessly, like you reduce the latency in your whole system. You do that, and then you put that on top of another a wafer, so that you can have, so right now the Dojo D1 tile, and I'm assuming the Dojo D2 tile will be similar, has 5 across and 5 wide, so 25 total chips of individual D1 systems that are all together on a wafer. So, and each system uses I believe D1 uses the through silicon via 2.5D architecture. But yeah, all of that's on a wafer. And so all of those chips can talk to each other very quickly, much faster than they could if they were on separate boards instead of all on one wafer together. And this is that's one way of trying to push the boundaries on AI training that's similar but different to what Cerebras is doing, which they just put all the logic on one huge wafer. And the challenge that Cerebras faces with that is that when you do that, there's going to be some areas of your chip where the quality didn't come out just right. And so you've got an area of your chip that's bad, it's doing bad math, it's doing bad logic. And so they had to figure out in software, how do we isolate those? So that's kind of their approach to that. And then, NVIDIA has taken a little bit less exotic packaging direction and just focus on how do we make this as general as possible, and then we'll continue to push things forward. And so what Tesla's now doing by abandoning kind of that frontier packaging technology is to begin building in a way that's a lot more similar to the general use case way that NVIDIA is doing. And they are probably going to be using a panel style packaging architecture for the Dojo version 3 configuration of the AI6 chips. We don't have to get into all of that. That's just to say that they're going to try to do with more conventional chips and more conventional packaging technology, something that's similar to what Dojo was doing on a larger scale. But yeah, using means that are a little bit easier, a little bit more tried and true, probably faster to scale, probably lower challenges with yield.